Good day, guys. Welcome to what should be second edition of On the Couch with MC, but here we are in chairs due to COVID, and we're here to talk about Limeburners, the second edition of the Hindmarsh project, which we're all pretty excited about. The two guys with us today, we have Cameron Simons, the founder of Limeburners, all the way from Margaret River, and he looks as though he's pretty happy there in the gumtree, so welcome, Cameron. And as usual, we've got Louis Mashmet, our head of brewing here at Partner. So we've got a quick 5 or 6 minutes for you today about the new Limeburners barrel-aged whisky. Cameron, I'd like to take it to you first and give us a bit of a background of where the barrels come from, why you're using it in your whisky process, and then what you'd expect for us to take out of the barrels once we get it over here into South Australia.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And thanks, Em. So I'm going to just have a little bit of the stout, and I've been told I'm the first person in the country to have this. So I'm savouring it, particularly in front of Louis and yourself, that I'm enjoying this before anybody else. So the barrel's an interesting journey for us. What we would call our wood policy in a distillery is it's one of the most fundamental things you can do. So we're using ex-American bourbon barrels that get sent over to us that we then use for Limeburners single malt whiskey. The barrels we send you have a combination of both peated and unpeated barrels in there, but mainly the unpeated variety. The French oak gives really nice vanillan flavours, and we would talk in terms of extractive or deductive flavours that will come from the barrel. So by the time we choose the barrels for you guys, because we're looking for those, the sweetest, nicest looking barrels that we can send over to you, they've really got that single malt element driving through it. Plus, we've got a lot of that, really lovely sort of vanillan characteristic. Of course, we also include some of our finishing casks. So we send some port and sherry barrels over there as well, which have been, if you like, within the Australian fortified wine industry for 7 or 8 years, had port and sherry in them, and then we use those as finishing. So after we've had some of our whiskey and American oak, we put it into these old port and sherry casks. So you get a lot of that richness of texture and flavour that extracts from those. So it's that combined a lot of barrels that we send over to the Pirate Life guys, and always very excited then to see the magic that you guys get to weave with them after that.
Yeah, well, mate, on that, I might handball over to Louis, and I know we always get excited here at the brewery when the truck arrives with barrels on it because, obviously with Jack and Red, they're tasked with Brewdog and all the whisky barrel aging that in Scotland. It's something we really relish and really excited about. So, Louis, can you just take us through the journey? The barrels come off the truck, get them into the warehouse, and just take us through the journey from that moment through to filling them up and then probably into fermentation.
Yeah, sure. So probably the most interesting thing about this beer compared to the previous year's release is the just giant increase in complexity. But I also think that it's got a far better whiskey character to it than previous, and that was driven primarily by the fact that when we did do our last release, we noticed that it was very oak dominated and it didn't have a lot of whiskey character to it. So we asked Cameron to send the barrels over right away, right after we emptied them, and even with a little bit of whiskey still left in there. And we definitely can sort of pick up the difference between last year and this year just in terms of the, improved whiskey character that's in it. When the barrels come off the truck, we do pretty much what I expect you to do with barrels and inspect them and make sure that they're all good and tacked together and all that kind of thing. If any of them have busted up in transport, we send them up to our Cooper in the Barossa Valley and get them knocked back together. And
we do all that free of charge too, Cameron, so there's no drama there.
And then it's a matter of filling them. And another thing that changed between last year's release and this year's release is that the beer that we've got in our glass at the moment was produced at the Port Adelaide Brewery. So the work that went into, or the beer that went into it, initially we were maybe a little bit apprehensive about whether or not the Port Adelaide brew kit, being a big high-tech German kit, could produce imperial stout that was complex enough to stand up against the barrels, but it's done a cracking job, and I'd say probably it's done a better job. I think this beer is better in every way, and that started with the initial beer. We don't really do too much thinking in terms of filling barrels because we're just going through and filling them all with the same beer. So there's no selection process at that point. But when it comes time to take the beer out of the barrels, we start to taste it. And we taste it at 3 months. That's our first tasting point. And from that point on, we're basically tasting to figure out the sweet spot. Okay, it's ready to come out of the barrel. Too long, and you'll start to develop quite a harsh, astringent, thin, and relatively unapproachable beer. Too early, and you just don't have enough of that barrel character in there. So we've found that between 3 and 6 months, depending on the temperature, time of year, maybe what type of barrel it is as well. I've noticed that the fresh American oak barrels definitely do their job a little quicker. I think that comes down to age and then it's a matter of blending the flavours, which would be very similar to what you do with your whiskies. And one thing that we definitely have seen with this batch is having that complexity, the sherry barrels, the port barrels, a couple of peated ones thrown in there. The ability to layer those flavours on top of one another in this beer has just made a huge difference. I think previous, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, it was very heavy tilt towards just their single malt American oak barrels, the first lot that you sent over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then this one we noticed there was a lot more sherry barrels and port barrels, and particularly the ones that come out of the sherry barrels are mind-blowing. When you're sitting out there doing barrel tastings, anything that's gone into a sherry barrel, I don't know what it is, but it's a magical mixture, the sherry, the whiskey, and the beer all together. And it's one of those moments where you sit there, you pull the nail out of the barrel, taste a little bit of the beer, and then you all sort of stand around and look at one another and go, how fucking good is that? So,
I think one of the things before we probably talk about the beverage itself, and I know, Cameron, you enjoyed receiving the tube in our packaging. I thought I might just touch on the logic behind putting a beer in can. And I think there was a couple of reasons. There's obviously a part of life we love cans. Our business has been based on cans over the last 5.5 years. But one of the comments we got from Series 1 of the Hindmarsh collection was a lot of people, they only bought one bottle, they had to drink it in one night and couldn't put it down. So the opportunity for people to buy a tube with 2 cans in it, they can sit down and really relish and enjoy the can now. But as we know, from experience with barrel-aged stuff, it only gets better and better with age. So for people to be able to put it down, I'd be interested for you to share your thoughts with us when you first saw the tube.
Oh, absolutely. So I was very fortunate. I had 2 bubble wrap packs arrive down in Albany for me, and I knew what they were coming. I didn't know what it was going to be. So, the first thing that struck me with the tube was it's really smart. The packaging job, I think, has been, exceptional. Again, your marketing guys have done a fantastic job on it. And then to see that there was 100ml cans, and of course this is at, 12%. So it's it's a saver stout for me. But I like that idea of being able to then taste if we call it a vintage, if you like, the beer, to be able to go, let's look at it now as a young beer, and then let's see how those flavours evolve, as the liquid sits in the can. Look, really impressed with that as an idea. Of course, for us, our cans travel a lot more easily than anything else, being in remote and regional Australia as we are.
I think, Louis, you might be able to touch on this a little bit too. I think quality control is always a big thing at Pirate Life, and we all, because we don't have a bottling line, it's always been an issue with quality. So if you want to talk us a little bit through that, just so before we get into having a drink.
Yeah. Look, we've set 2 beers off site for bottling, and there's just so many pitfalls along the way. Tankering beer, unless you've got a purpose-made tanker that's built for transporting beer. If you're transporting in a wine tanker, you're just opening yourself up to all sorts of sort of negative aspects, primarily oxidisation. So putting it in can, it was a huge driver, was to maintain the quality and the freshness of the beer. I think anyone who drank last year's release would say that the kegs really blew the bottles out of the water, whereas this year I think that they're pretty much neck and neck in terms of the quality and the carry through of the flavours and all the rest of it. So I'm really happy that we could keep it in-house and keep the quality control there. And I think that this is actually killer presentation.
We all agree.
It's wicked.
Cameron, as a global, with somebody with a global palate about whiskey, I'd like to go to you first on what your take is on the beer itself, because I think the palate that you've developed over many, many years in the whiskey business is probably much different to Louis. He's in his short period of time in the beer industry has developed a great palate. But I'd like to get your views on the drink first from a whiskey point of view, and then I'll hand back over to Louis to talk a bit about what he takes from the beer, from a brewing point of view.
Yeah, sure. The first thing I was struck with this beer, and I did share it with the distilling staff, so people have also got well-developed palates. There's a really full mouthfeel. And I'd divide my palate into front, middle, and back. And then again, I'd be looking for what are my top notes, what are my middle notes, and what are my bass notes coming through. I talk like a band, your drummers, your bass in the background, and you look for your top note, who's your lead singer, and your middles, your backup singer, your bass guitar. The song's not the same without them, but they're not the lead. So we sort of applied that type of analysis to this. Look, incredibly light mouthfeel. So when it comes into your mouth, it's almost like, do I have liquid in my mouth? But at the same time, your mouth's incredibly full. So it's this, very light, refreshing, flavour or mouthfeel that comes through. In terms of the flavours, certainly being an imperial stout, you're getting a lot of those, really rich roasted characteristics from the grain bill. And I'm envious to ask, and maybe offline, so you don't give away the IP, but what your mash bill was for this. And but certainly, I think it's an incredibly rich flavour. There's a whole lot of complex flavours, beyond the roastiness that you get from the grain, which you expect to be, your predominant element there. There's some pine needles. There's light chocolate honeycomb characteristics. There's an incredible sweetness to it. But that acidity balance, I think, is really, really good in this. So, as a stout, I've got to go, gentlemen. This is my top one or two stouts I've ever tried. And me, if Louis, I've got to take my hat off to you. I think this year, mate, you have absolutely hit this out of the park. We are really proud, I guess, to have the Limeburners brand and our barrels associated with what I'd call such a stunning whiskey. And the thing that interests me the most is to see how the beer's going to evolve in time. So to see, which flavours become more enhanced, which ones become a little bit more subtle, because it's already a cracking beer. And, of course, being that imperial stout, it is going to, sort of evolve and improve really over time.
So cracking description, thank you very much. And thank you for the compliments. Louis, from a brewing point of view, give us your overview.
Yeah, firstly, thanks, Cam. I really appreciate that. And I'd have to say that a large part of the thanks for this beer has to go to the brewing team, because a lot of the team are super passionate about this project and this product, and put in extra time and effort on the weekends and that sort of stuff to make this beer happen and happen as good as it does. One thing that I've sort of found really beneficial was last year we were lucky enough to go and visit you down in Albany and try your whiskies at the distillery, and also see the way that you make your product and sort of taste the whiskey as it's going through its first sort of distillation and second and all that sort of thing. So I can start to tear apart the elements of this beer that are down to the whiskey and the elements that are down to the beer. The biggest thing for me is just that complexity. The barrel characters that we're getting off this beer are just so much better than last year. I'm so happy with it. I'm super excited for customers to get their hands on this, because I think that it's one of the first times in Australia that there's an opportunity for the consumer to taste a whiskey barrel-aged stout of the likes that you can get your hands on in the United States and over in Europe and that sort of thing, because there's genuinely not many distillers, I don't think, in Australia that produce such a wide range of whiskies as you do. And I think that complexity of your range is really showcased very well in this beer. And for me, the thing that really makes it and just caps it all off is those little hints of peat smoke. I absolutely love it. So Yeah, it's a good beer.
Thanks, Lee. Well,
Suffice to say, I'm happy with it.
before we sign off, guys, the good news is that we've just received 120 new barrels of Limeburners to start working on version 3 of the Hindmarsh the Hindmarsh development. So we're looking forward to version 3. But more importantly, Cameron, as always, thank you for your help. Thanks for sharing your brand with us at Pirate Life, and look forward to making some cracking beers over the next 10 years.
Absolutely. And so, no, look, appreciate collaborating with you guys, and look forward to what we can do from here. So,
Yes.
Good night, mate. Bye.